6:32, so we're going to get started now. Nice to see so many people here, around about 80 at the moment, and I imagine plenty more will watch the follow-up to this as well. So really nice to see everybody. Some names that I recognize in there too, having had some conversations and some email conversations with some of you. Tonight is the opportunity for us to talk about ultimately how you can show us your best through applying. I'm also hoping that a few of our careers partners will be in the mix here too, because this is a lot of useful information that they can share with their students as well. I hope that you have, at the very least, if you're considering applying to Charityworks, which hopefully you are, being here at the webinar, that you've opened an application at this point, or if you haven't, there's no time like the present to at least start on your application. You get a really great sense of what the questions are beforehand, but don't worry if you haven't. Whilst I'm not going to go into too much specific detail about the application, I am going to talk more broadly about some of the skills and techniques that people use to perform well during the application process. This is a lovely slide coming up here of some of the Charityworks team. My name is Craig. I am in that photo somewhere. And I am the campaigns manager for Charityworks, which essentially means that I run our recruitment campaign. So going to universities, talking to our university partners. And I'm also pretty heavily involved in the recruitment and selection process. So part of the interview process at assessment centres, for example. And so a lot of what I'll be telling you is based off of a couple of years' experience of being part of that process, but also just thinking about general graduate recruitment best practice. We're working with around about 100 partner nonprofit organizations, and as a team, we're also working on a number of, we're working with a number of organizations on some of our other programs, which means that we see graduate recruitment in a much kind of broader light, I think, than most graduate recruiters. So hopefully that will be helpful. So like I say, I'm Craig. I will be with you tonight to talk you through the slides. I'm also monitoring the text chat box. Multitasking was never one of my greatest skills. So if you're answering or asking questions and I am not picking them up, there will be a Q&A session at the end. And that's when I'm going to go back through, but it may be useful for you to reiterate some questions as you go towards the end. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to remind you about what Charityworks is. Now, many of you, I hope, in fact, I'm going to ask in the text chat box, if you could let me know if you attended our first of these webinar sessions. The first session being everything you need to know about Charityworks. So in that session, we covered off what the program was, what we were looking for. We covered over what the roles looked like, where they were based in the UK, what our charity partners look like, and the non-profit organizations that we work with. We've also talked about the leadership development program, which is a really, really important part of the Charityworks program as a whole. And then we took some questions kind of overall, thinking about the Charityworks program. So yes, quite a few people have attended, but a few people didn't. So this is mainly for the people that didn't, and also to jog the memories of those of you who did attend, and those of you who already know a fair bit about the Charityworks program. And great job if you didn't watch it live, but did watch it afterwards. So that's great. Nice to see Samuel again. I know a few people in this text chat box who were at that session. So great if you were, but if not, now's a chance for us to just take 5 or so minutes just to recap on some of the things that we talked about. Really useful recap. So a reminder of what Charityworks is in the first place. So ultimately, Charityworks is a combination of things, but at its heart, it is a full-time paid role at one of our partner non-profit organizations. So as a Charityworks graduate trainee, you'll be delivering a full-time paid job on a 12-month term at one of our partner charity or housing associations. At the same time, you will also be working towards a leadership development program. So on that leadership development program, which also takes 12 months, you will be spending time doing various different things. I'm going to talk about that very briefly in a moment. But ultimately, the aim of the program as a whole, so the leadership development component and the job, is to build you and equip you with the tools that you need to be an emerging leader within the UK social sector. So the reasoning behind the programme is ultimately that the non-profit sector, in order to tackle some of the most complex issues that the UK is facing, and frankly there are quite a number of those complex issues, whether or not that's something related to affordable housing or health and social care, or whether or not it's working with one of our partners that supports education, or it's the environment. There's a number of different social issues that need tackling. And in order to do that, organizations need really great talent and really great future leaders and people that are going to lead the sector where it needs to go. In order to do that, they need great graduate talent, and that's where you guys come in. And essentially, this program is about building you up to be that emerging leader within that sector. So over the course of the 12 months of the job and also the leadership development program, you'll also be building on experience of the sector more generally. You'll be gaining an understanding of key issues affecting the sector and, of course, whatever aspect of the sector in which you're working. You'll also have access to a national network dedicated to ultimately making a difference. And we'll just mention that very briefly again before I crack on with some of the skills. You'll also be getting a level of training and support as well. So essentially, the Charityworks program comprises that 12-month role. And when you apply to the program, you apply to the program as a whole. And then if you're successful, we work to placement match you based on a number of different factors. And in terms of what that looks like, that's your preferences around location, first and foremost. So where in the UK you would like to be based. What kind of cause area where you'd like to be working. So that might be poverty alleviation, or it might be international development, or it could be social housing or social care or hospice care, whatever that might be. And then we will also take into fact your consideration over the type of role you'd like to be doing. And in terms of what those roles look like, they can be very corporate. So we have roles available in HR and IT. We have roles that are involved in research and policy, campaigning and external comms. And we also have some frontline based roles where you're working directly with service users as well. So we take into consideration your preferences, and we ask you to be as flexible on one of those three things, or as many of those three things, so location, cause, and role type, as you can be. And that's really because actually you might think that there's something that you really want to do within the non-profit sector, but you might not be aware of the kind of breadth of the sector and what's available to you. We definitely work with you to make sure that you're matched to an employer where you will be happy working and be able to develop your skills. On top of that, there's the 12-month leadership development program, and that essentially comprises a mix of facilitated learning, where you will come together in a cohort of about 20 to 25 other trainees who'll be working at different organizations, but all on Charityworks, and you will be taken through leadership and management training, but contextualized to the non-profit sector. So today was a cohort session. One of my colleagues was running that, and it was based on innovation in the sector, and that's what they were working on as a kind of group cohort today. You'll also have the opportunity to attend national conferences with some leading key speakers within the sector. You'll also be matched to a peer coach, so somebody else who's on the Charityworks program who you will be able to coach one another, particularly through live work issues that come up, and I think that peer support is incredibly important. You'll also have access to a mentor. Now, that mentor is normally somebody who's 5 or 10 years perhaps down the line in their career than you are. It's normally somebody who doesn't work in the organization in which you're working. So it could be a professional coach, or it could be a senior leader from another charity. And that person is there thinking about your career development and providing that mentoring relationship, which is incredibly important. And then there's also the opportunity for you to produce what we call impact research. And that research is a chance for you to build your profile within the sector. So you'll be researching something that has a tangible impact either on the sector as a whole or on the organization in which you're working. And we've had some great successes through that research as well. What we found is that a great example, one of our trainees was working for the National Housing Federation. She conducted her impact research on the effect that Brexit would have on social housing in the UK. And then she ended up delivering that at a number of different events to people in government, to people in the third sector, which was great for building her profile, but great for the organisation as well to have a kind of leading document produced by a trainee. And absolutely, Andrew, yes, the leadership development programme is run alongside the year that you are employed full-time at the charity partner. You will have time during that, usually a day or two in a month, where you will be released from work to be working on the leadership development programme. This is a slide, lovely slide, which shows you an example and definitely a sample as well of non-profit employers that we have worked with in the past or are working with this year. And it's to let you know as well that for 2018, we're recruiting 140 to potentially 150 graduates across around about 80 to 100 non-profit partners. So these organizations really, really diverse in terms of size and in terms of who their service user base is. So we've got some large international development organizations like Mary Stopes International or UNICEF. We've got organizations like Christian Aid or NSPCC. We've got advocacy groups and more moderately sized organizations like the LGBT Foundation. And we're also working with a number of smaller community-based charities, smaller environmental charities. There really is something on offer across the whole sector for everybody. So there's quite a mix. There's a lot more information about the website. And if you want to know a little bit more about our employer partners, I would definitely suggest that you check out our first webinar, which is everything you need to know about the program. Just touching on the leadership program, the leadership development program is endorsed by the Institute of Leadership and Management. It's not a direct qualification program, but it is endorsed by the ILM. And as a result, when you complete the Charityworks program, you become a Charityworks fellow. And Charityworks trainees are fast becoming more and more recognized within the sector as a kind of mark of quality in terms of the leadership development training that they've been through and the experience that they've gained. Claire asked, do we have many opportunities available in Scotland? We do have opportunities available in Scotland, not as many as we would like, but that is growing year on year. And I'm also involved with the business development of Charityworks, which is gaining new partner charities, and Scotland is an area of focus for us this year. So we really hope to have more charities from Scotland on board for September 2018. Jenny asked about some environmental charities. We're working with a number of wildlife trust association organisations, and we're also working with a whale and dolphin trust, which is based on the Isle of Mull, which actually I think is one of the most incredible placements, to disappear to the Isle of Mull for a year and to work in whale and dolphin conservation. Quite incredible. So yes, I'm going to catch up with some of these questions at the end. A lot of this information is available in our Everything You Need to Know webinar. So please do check that out after this. The recording is sitting there and on YouTube. It's worth mentioning finally that Charityworks is Times Top 100 graduate employer. On the left there we have Programme Director Ned at our induction, and a number of very keen students clearly aching to ask him a question. But I put that up there for the logo. This year is the first year that we are recognised in the Times Top 100 graduate employers. Essentially what that means is that graduates or people graduating were asked the question, an open-ended question of who they thought provided the best graduate opportunities, and we were included among the list of the 100 best employers. Please check out the Times Top 100 list for more information about us there too. But what I've come to talk to you tonight about ultimately is the recruitment and selection process and ways in which you can basically be in a position where you're able to articulate your skills and experience in a really positive way through the process. And just a recap on what that process looks like. It starts with an online application form. So you go to charity-works.co.uk and click to apply. You'll be asked a series of self-selection questions, and you will also then have the opportunity to start your application. The application form consists of 4 competency-based questions, and we will be scoring those competency-based questions based against our framework. If once you've submitted that, within 7 days, you are invited to our online tests. And our online tests, many of you will be pleased to know, don't include a numeracy test, but they do include a verbal reasoning and situational judgment test and a work-based questionnaire as well. Those are more challenging things for me to talk about in terms of how you can prepare for those. I always recommend that you go to some providers. I can certainly share information about which provider that we use. We're quite transparent about that, but there are plenty of others as well, like Connexa, for example, who will have examples of what those kind of online tests look like. What's really interesting about the online test is ultimately it's about determining fit in the first instance. And we always ask candidates, particularly if you're given multiple choice questions around how you would react in a given situation, that you just answer as honestly as possible. Because actually, if you answer honestly and you don't make it through that stage of the test, it may just be that actually the scheme may not be right for you at this time. And I knew somebody would ask if I would give you help with the online tests. I can talk about them in a little bit more detail, Connor, particularly if that's a stage that you fell down at last year. But I'll give you a few tips and advice towards the end of the presentation on those. The next stage is, of course, our full-day assessment centre, where you'll take part in a number of group-based activities, a panel interview, a strategy exercise, some written exercises. So it is a quite comprehensive process. It's also a very competitive process. But actually the sense on the day at the assessment centre, and I've been to many of these now, is actually just a great sense of really social-minded graduates coming together and getting to learn a lot about the non-profit sector before you even start. You have an opportunity to network with some employers, so it's a really great opportunity. The assessment centres, Taslim, are held across the UK, and we have finalised our venues for this year. I believe they will be in London, Manchester, and there is a third venue. And because we run another programme, I always get confused where it is. So let me double check where that is, and I will let you know. So I want to ask you a question first, and that's what concerns you the most about completing an application. And I don't mean necessarily just for Charityworks, I just mean more generally. So when you look at an application form, I'd love to know what your thoughts are around what concerns you the most. So you open the application, you fill in all the easy stuff, you rush through all the stuff that's where you went to university and what you studied and everything else, and you get to the point where you are asked some competency-based questions. And I just want you to let me know what your concerns are, because it'd be great to get a steer from you before I start talking about the application form. So I'm just going to give you a minute or so to do that. And there is a slight delay in the text box to what I can see before I start reading it. So it may be that some of you are typing a few things now. So I'm going to give it a minute, and here they come. Yeah, it's a good point, Connor. So Connor says that if I write something which you think is perfect and you still don't get accepted, that's a really good point. And actually what some people think is the perfect answer, sometimes it depends on the application that you're doing and the organization that you're applying to. But certainly in our case, it's more about making sure you articulate your skills in a way that meets our competency framework, rather than it is often about expressing a number of skills. And I'll talk about what I mean by that in a moment. Really big one, Natalie. So people that want to talk about, or whenever they get asked to turn a failure or a weakness into a strength, or, you know, naturally talking about our failures and weaknesses, particularly in the context of applying for a job, is really, really difficult. Actually, it's not an easy thing to do, because you will want to put a positive spin on something, and actually naturally as people, I think sometimes we find it really difficult to acknowledge our failures anyway. Somebody's worried about the online tests. We'll talk about those slightly separately. Lots of people worried about the online tests. Yes, the online tests are timed, but actually we give an incredibly generous amount of time that already factors in additional time, which would normally be factored in for people that would require a reasonable adjustment. That being said, if you do have a reasonable adjustment because of a disability, do let us know, because we can add time extensions as well. But the tests are incredibly generously timed. Not knowing what the criteria against the questions are, Hannah, that's a great point. And I'm going to come to this in a moment about criteria in terms of answering questions, trying to sell yourself. Yeah, let's talk about that too. Whether the application is going to be timed. So our application form is not timed. So actually you can take anywhere between now and the 28th of February to complete that. Please don't wait until the 28th of February. Once you've watched this webinar and viewed some of the information that we've got online, you are in a great position to start answering those questions and to submit your application. And I would thoroughly advise you to do that before Christmas if possible. We are planning to remain open until the 28th of February, but at the same time, I just want to be mindful that the scheme is incredibly popular. And if we ever did decide to close early, obviously I wouldn't want anyone to be left in that situation. Let's talk about application form. There's some great answers there, and I'm sorry that I couldn't get to all of them. That's a really interesting point about having to talk about yourself without feeling big-headed. I've read so many applications that I think if there weren't application forms and they were just natural statements that somebody had come up and said to me in the street, I would be thinking, what an arrogant person that is. But actually, within the context of an application form, there is a way of articulating your skills without worrying too much about how you come across in terms of your ego. So let's talk a little bit about the application process and the application form in particular, and some good advice around this. Before I step onto this, I just want to ask if there's any best practice approaches about application forms that any of you know about already. So if you've been advised by your career service, anything with regards to how you approach an application, it would be nice to see if you could share that within the text chat box. So again, I'm going to give you a minute or so to do that. There'll be a slight delay from me asking to me getting the answer. So I'm just going to go silent for a moment. Yes, that didn't take long. Star, Lily, that is great. So does anybody, yes, we're going to talk about STAR, but we're going to extend it slightly. Look at everybody who knows the STAR method. That's amazing. Okay. Yep. Does anybody want to be brave and tell me what STAR stands for? And well, I'm so pleased you mentioned it, because we are going to talk about it. Yes, Andrew, big kudos to Andrew, who has decided that he's not going to just be a star, he's going to stare. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. Yes, 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 that's all good. Situation, task, action, result. Or response, as long as you know what it means. And yes, Liv, this is being recorded and will be sent to you at the end. So this is good. This is a good place to start. So let's start with some of the more obvious stuff. So actually, where a lot of people will fall down is actually just not by doing their homework and not preparing for an application. So first and foremost, you need to know what's being assessed. And somebody picked up on this in the text chat box. I thought that was really useful. It sounds like I'm just telling you common sense things, but I'm telling you this for a reason. Read our website. On our website, you will find out plenty about the program, but you'll also find out plenty about the values of Charityworks and why the program exists. And actually, the program doesn't exist necessarily to serve graduates. Ultimately, it exists to serve the beneficiaries of the charities in which you would be working. Those charities need great talent, and you guys are a means to improve the lives of beneficiaries and to create social change. So actually, be aware of that and appreciate the values, and they're clear on the website. But probably the most important thing that's on the website is the stated competencies we're looking for. We list ours really openly. We tell you what they are and we tell you what they mean. And I think that's really important, because you need to know what it is we're looking for. Firstly, because you may be looking at it and thinking, I'm not sure that I have those competencies. And in which case you might not feel that the program is right for you. But most of you will be looking and thinking, I have those competencies. I need to start thinking of some ways in which I can express them in the application form. So let me take you through what these competencies are. I'm not doing anything to give you a leg up in the application process, because all of this is perfectly readable on our website. So we're just going to fly through them, and you can come back to these on the website when you're filling in your application. So first and foremost, and first, because it's alphabetical, I think. No, it isn't. They're in no particular order. Beneficiary and customer focus. So irrespective of whether you were in a role that was really back office doing some kind of development or strategy, or whether you were working directly with service users, beneficiaries are the number one priority of any charitable organization. So you need to be able to show a commitment and a desire to anticipate, meet or exceed the needs and expectations of beneficiaries. So that's one. Communicate with impact. So people that can communicate really clearly and effectively, both verbally and in writing. you will express some of that in just through applying, and actually just being mindful that your application is written in such a way in which it's easy to read and communicates your impact and the impact that you've had really clearly. And I think that's important, because we don't necessarily need to ask you a question about how you communicate. We're assessing it when we read what you've written, and we're assessing it when we meet you in person at the assessment centre as well. So really important. Building positive relationships, so being a good team player and being able to build and maintain strong interpersonal relationships. I don't know a single employer who would not ask for that, and so you should already, I would imagine, be thinking of examples of when you've done that in the past. So particularly thinking about professional relationships with colleagues, with anyone who may be a beneficiary or a customer, working towards shared goals. We're also looking for people that are resilient. You will always face challenges, and you will naturally have always faced moments of failure in your life. And sometimes we are really reluctant to talk about those, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes it's an ego thing. And actually, sometimes it's because you are applying for a job and you don't want to come across as having any weaknesses. You do have weaknesses, we all have them, but how we deal with them is a demonstration of resilience, so just bear that in mind. Results driven, to be able to maintain focus on an organization's missions and values. Again, I don't want to read them all out, but they are all available on the website. And importantly, actually it's not emboldened here, but if you see about halfway down, results driven is innovative and entrepreneurial. So that is something that we're looking for in itself. We want great graduate talent in the sector, because often people come up with really curious new approaches to the way that they're tackling things, and organizations want that. Our partner employers want to see fresh graduate talent come in with some really great creative ideas, and that you're not afraid to share them, and also that you're adaptable. The sector, and I often say this to students when I'm talking to them on campus, I think if you can cut your teeth in the non-profit sector, you really can cut them anywhere. The sector faces a number of different demands, not least of all a growing demand from service users and the number of service users, particularly in an environment where the state has shrunk quite considerably through a period of austerity. So there are more and more people that are dependent on charities where they would normally be dependent on public sector organizations, like things that their council would run. And also the lack of funding coming into the sector, particularly from government. These things might scare you, but actually those are really great challenges, and that's part of the reason why we need great leaders in that space. You will be working in an environment where you will often be dealing with tight budgets and often be dealing with increased demands and pressures from service users. And that comes back to being innovative and entrepreneurial, coming up with ways to tackle some of those issues. It's an incredibly exciting place to be working. Be aware that that's something that we're looking for, your ability to be adaptable. This last one is on a slide all of its own, partly because I ran out of space on the last slide, but also partly because I think it deserves a bit of attention. We are looking for people who are committed to their own personal development. So people that will seek out their own learning and invest highly in their own personal development. The Charityworks program comprises so many different learning elements that we need people who want to engage with those as much as they can. And how much you put into the program will very much show how much you get out of it. And the reasoning behind that is ultimately there are lots of different things you can get involved with when you're on the program. You will be working and on the leadership development program, and that will take up roughly about a 37.5 to 40-hour week, depending on what you're doing, maybe a little bit more during periods of research. But there are great opportunities on the Charityworks program to do a number of different things to support us with campaigns. None of these are obligatory or compulsory, but actually there are plenty of opportunities for you to develop, to network, to meet new people, to go to social events. We run a number of different events aimed at our partners, but also welcome our trainees to come along as well. So a really, really great opportunity for you if you're committed to your own personal development. So important. Lily, you're not sure how to show that on an application form. If I remember correctly, one of the questions on the application form will relate to something to do with that. I would imagine. I'm not telling you that because I know that for certain. It's been a while since I've looked at the application form for deliberate reason, actually, because I didn't want to fall into the trap of just talking you through the application form. yeah, it's about your learning. It's about thinking about ways in which you're seeking out learning. That's what commitment to personal development is. Connor has a quick question. I graduated this year, so will have been a graduate for a year. And Henry has answered the question for you. Yes, doesn't matter when you graduated. It doesn't matter how old you are. We have applicants come through the process that are in their 50s and 60s and want a career change. There is no time limit on when you can apply. And if you've applied before, please do consider applying again if you were unsuccessful and you think that you've learned a lot through the process. Yeah, Natalie, that's right. Nobody will tell you that you can't apply because you've already graduated a while ago. We've got plenty of trainees on the program who have got a bachelor's degree, who've got a master's, some that have even got a PhD, some that graduated 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Pretty much the majority, I think, have graduated within the past couple of years. So yeah, you will be in good company. So let's talk a little bit about the next stage of the application form, and I want to talk about answering the question. So this sounds really, really common sense, and I'm probably patronizing you. So if you want to do some of those eye-rolling emojis, you're welcome to do it. But it's so important. So many times people will miss parts of the questions and they won't answer it all. So answer the question in full and be particularly wary if a question has multiple parts to it. If you've got 250 words to answer a question and it's in 3 parts, then don't spend 200 words on one part of the question and only gloss over the other parts of it either. You can only be marked against the criteria that we have set if you address the question being asked. And the reason we do this is to make the process fair for everyone. If we're marking against the exact same criteria for everybody, it makes the process fair. However excellent your answer is in a competency-based interview, I've referred to interviews here, but in an application form, it's the same. It won't score well if it doesn't address the question specifically. You could tell me about an amazing piece of experience, and actually, if this was a more informal interview or this was a more informal process, that experience might kind of pique my interest and I'd want to drill down into it a little bit more. But actually, if you focus on a piece of experience and it's not really relevant to the question being asked, then choose a different piece of experience. Even if it sounds less impressive, we'd rather you are answering the question. So important. And just to answer a couple of your questions, yes, you can give us an indication of location, Sarah, and how large of a cohort do we take? We take 140 to 150 trainees each year. We received around about 3,000 applications in total last year. But don't let that worry you too much, because actually a lot of our applicants will not have followed any of this advice, and the fact you're here already gives you a distinct advantage during that process. Jess, I'm going to answer that question about standing out in a couple of moments' time. Somebody mentioned the STAR technique, and then Andrew, wherever you are, Andrew, make yourself known, mentioned the Stair technique, and that's what I want to talk to you about. And I want to talk to you about it in a little bit more detail maybe than you've heard about it before. So for those that don't know or didn't follow the conversation in the text chat box earlier, the Stair technique is a great writing technique to be able to articulate an answer in a competency-based question. What some people often decide to do is that they will answer the question, but they won't structure it in a particularly strong way, and as a result, we find hard to allocate marks to it. So what I would say, and there's Andrew there. Good to see you, Andrew. So I'm going to talk you through it. So the STAIR technique, ultimately STAIR stands for situation, task, action, result, and the last and important point is evaluation. So the okay answers, and the ones that score okay and don't stand out so much and probably don't make it through the process, are those that just outline the two items of that STAIR technique that I've highlighted in a yellowy orange color, and that's task and action. So they will tell us what the task was that they were set with, or what the problem was, and they will tell us what action they took. Notice that they will have to tell us what action they took. If you find that you are putting forward an example because you think, this is Charityworks, so I better mention in a question the year abroad that I took, working with underprivileged children, for example, which I'm not bashing, by the way, because there are a number of people that have done that, and I think it's incredible work and great experience. But if you did very little during your time that was related to the question, and you are referring constantly to what the team did, you're better off picking another example. So we're talking about action here, so the action that you took. And those that do task and action, they answer okay. And actually what we find is that some people will decide that they want to cram lots of experience into one question. So tell us about a time when you were resilient, and they want to tell us 5, 6, 7 times where they were resilient. But the issue is, because of the restriction in the amount of words you can write for a question, they will keep bouncing between task and action. They'll tell us what the task was, what they did, and then another example, what the task was and what they did. And that's fine, but you're never going to get the big marks in being able to do that. Better answers, I'll look at that in a moment, Jenny. Better answers will do the bits in green as well. So before they even tell us what the task or the problem was, they will give us a sentence or two that contextualizes the issue in the first place, so a bit of situation. The reason for that is actually, as a marker, it is much easier to get into and understand an answer to a question when somebody contextualizes that in a sentence or two beforehand. If you immediately jump into a task, what I often find is that when I'm marking, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, why were they set this task? What was this about? And actually, I'm concentrating more on that than I am trying to, and I'm having to work harder to find marks within your answer. So a bit of contextualization around the situation, and also giving the result. Please tell us what the result was of the action that you took. Preferably, it would be a positive result to show that your action implemented some kind of positive change, but it doesn't have to be wholly positive. And the reason I say this is because of the evaluation point. So the absolute best answers is the third bullet point on this slide. The best answers shine when wrapping up with a strong evaluation statement or point of learning. And even better, if within that statement, you can show us that actually you went ahead and took that learning and applied it, even if that's just a sentence. And I'm going to talk you through a totally random example in a moment of what that looks like. So always be mindful that the answer can display strong relevance to the role that you're applying for. That's another thing too. So just make sure that the answer is relevant. And when I'm talking about role, you won't know where your placement will be if you're successful in the program. So for the whole application, consider that you're applying to the Charityworks program specifically. That's really important. By all means, you can make reference to times that you've spent, maybe you've had lots of experience working with young people and it's clear that you want to work in an education charity. That's absolutely fine. But don't limit yourself in the application as if you're applying to one specific charity or one specific type of role. You're applying to the program as a whole. Just before I do that, let's pick up on a couple of these questions. So Jenny asked quite bluntly, how do we answer the first question using the Stair technique? So actually, I'm going to be really careful here because I don't want to talk through questions specifically, but questions that ask about your motivation, sometimes it's not necessary to use the Stair technique, I think. I think that actually, sometimes it can just provide a loose framework for questions around motivation. So, you want to be touching on the reasons why you want to apply for sure, and you need to be thinking broadly about what they are. But the framework still gives you a rough idea about how you can kind of take me on a bit of a journey with that answer, I guess. A bullet point list is probably not great. Getting some understanding of you and your motivations and where you see yourself and what this is for, and that's really useful. But don't stick too rigidly to those kind of techniques for those kind of questions, because they're less about discrete competencies. Natalie is absolutely right. I imagine you don't need to use a specific situation for that question. Yes, that's absolutely right, Natalie. And she is not wrong. So yes, I've just confirmed that. So that hopefully that helps you out there, Jenny. Let's talk through what I mean in a little bit more detail. So you'll have heard this from your careers advisors. We definitely look at these kind of structured answers. So I'm reassuring you, if you've heard about the Stair technique before, then you are in the right place when you're using it for these type of answers. So situation, contextualize the situation. A sentence or two is usually enough. Task, what I was tasked with doing, or what the problem was that I had to overcome. Action, what was the action I took? So important that it's what you took, the action that you took. The result, what was the outcome of the action related to the task? And evaluation, what did I learn from this, and can I briefly evidence the learning? So our university society was running a an event, and I had the challenge of raising awareness and marketing this event, and specifically I was tasked with leafleting the campus. But what I found was that actually leafleting the campus, I wasn't getting anywhere near the kind of numbers that I wanted. So I went to another area of the city where there's another student population who were also able to attend, and I started to leaflet that area as well. As a result, and this is really great, a result point, if you can be quantifiable with your result, or you can take something tangible away rather than just, and we all had a fantastic time. So the result was that 30% more people applied than they did last year, or the event went better because, and some examples. And then the evaluation, well, now I know that I have to plan my campaign a little bit more clearly to make sure that I'm reaching a wider audience. That is a terrible example that I've just made up off the cuff, but it gives you an idea of how to apply the Stair technique. Please don't use that or any kind of loosely related example in any of your questions. But yes, that gives you an idea of what Stair looks like, I guess, in practice. So hopefully that is kind of helpful. Let's talk about answers to specific questions, how that looks in practice. So actually having depth in one answer, and this relates to Charityworks, this relates to anything that you are applying for, having depth in your answer. It's more important to have depth in one answer, but to have breadth across different answers to different questions. What I mean by this is draw on different experiences and different examples for different questions. It's great to be able to do that, I think, because you can draw on experience from university, maybe student society, maybe volunteering. I imagine that you're talking about specifically, particularly in this instance, a lot of you will have probably had voluntary experience. So use different examples from different things that you've done, but within a specific question, when you're asked a specific question, try and stick to a single example, or try and stick to no more than two, but I actually think one is usually preferable. And there's a reason for that. If you're going through 3, 4, 5 examples, you're never getting out the starting box. You're always going back to task and action. You don't have enough in the word count to give us a strong rounded answer if you just list a bunch of experience. And that's a mistake that a lot of applicants will make. They think an application form is an opportunity for them to demonstrate all their experience, and actually it is in some sense, because you are talking about different examples. You're using breadth across. I've got here interview, which is where the slide originated from, but application form is the same. Using different examples does demonstrate a kind of a holistic look at your experience. But remember, we're marking you against competencies for the program, and if you've had 10 pieces of voluntary experience, or you've had 1, or you've worked in Costa Coffee part-time during your degree, and also done a little bit of work related to social change, versus you've spent 1 year abroad, it doesn't matter. And in terms of the extent, it doesn't matter. What we want to see is great examples and potential that you can draw out from those examples. So that brings me on to my next point, which is never undervalue your experience. There is usually no piece of experience, as long as it's professionally related, that isn't useful when answering a competency-based question. So whether it's your part-time job, or whether it's, you might work part-time in a bar in an evenings, that's perfectly useful experience. Just because this is the Charityworks program and a highly prestigious graduate program, don't think that those experiences, if they're relevant to the question, aren't useful, because they are. Of course, try if you can to draw an experience from your voluntary, the voluntary sector, to draw so that we can see your passion and motivation. But those experiences have their value too, so don't undervalue them, and make sure when you're writing about your experience, you're writing with confidence. Some people write a little bit apologetically because actually they're thinking, applicants are going to have great experience and it doesn't compare to mine, so even though it wasn't this. Or some people maybe go the other way and write with a little bit too much ego. Actually, I'm not sure you can do that so much unless you're really crass and really kind of dismissive of people in the way that you answer your questions. So if you're dealing with people and you're super dismissive about them, obviously that doesn't reflect on you too well. But don't undervalue your experience. Make sure you write with confidence and draw on those varied experiences. I want to talk about the question of why us. I think this is really important. So I want you to think really carefully about what it is in particular. Now, this slide was made up for a graduate recruitment event more broadly. So when I said particularly about the role or the program that interests you, in this case, obviously, we're talking about. So what is it in particular about Charityworks as a program that interests you? Again, you're not going to have information about the specific role in which you'll be working, and you're not going to have information about the specific employer. But you need to be thinking carefully about what it is about this role, this program that's right for you. And think about that very broadly, the program as a whole, and the program comprises many components. Why is Charityworks right for you now? So actually, one of the important things you'll often be asked on application forms, of any application form, is, why are you right for this role, or why do you want to apply to us? We're looking for motivation. I want to see a candidate who really wants to make the most of this program, and really wants to be on it for all the right reasons, and wants to contribute to the sector. But I want them to be authentic, and I want them to be honest. So I want you to talk about, we as marketers want to see that you're passionate about it, but from a place of authenticity and honesty. We can see through nonsense. So when people are talking kind of, they're painting themselves into a picture of someone that they're not. We can see through that, more so in an interview than in an application form. So be authentic by all means. But you want to be thinking about building your narrative as an applicant, and why is this the right opportunity, not just for you generally, but why is it the right opportunity for you now at this point in your career, this point in your academic career? And that will be different for different people depending on what stage you're at. But what about the experience and knowledge that you already have makes this the right next step for you? And also, where will it take you? Where do you see it taking you in 2 to 5 years' time? So think about why us, not just generally, but think about it in terms of why it's right for you now. I think that's super important. I'm going to give you some general advice about application forms as well, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of questions. So is it best to write about relevant experiences rather than the most recent job experience where the situation may have happened? Natalie says absolutely, and Natalie is absolutely right. So I would tend not to draw on experiences that are older than maybe your post-16 education. So, I mean, I would aim at experiences that are kind of from the age of kind of whenever you started university up. But I think that some people have drawn on things that they've done in A level, for example, or experiences they had before university, and that's fine. But I wouldn't want to go any further back than that. But I think what you would want to do is to think about, mainly because those experiences won't be super relevant, right? I mean, what you did when you were 14 probably isn't super relevant. In fact, I could probably tell you a lot of things I did when I was 14 would not stand well on a Charityworks application form, and I will not be the only body in that situation. But essentially, you want to be aiming for experiences that's most relevant. And would not knowing what course area you definitely want to work in be of a detriment to your answer to this question? Absolutely not, Samuel, absolutely not. So you're applying to the program, and actually a lot of people apply to Charityworks and they just want to make a difference in their careers, and they're not quite sure what that looks like. And part of Charityworks is about challenging perceptions about what you think might be where you want to work. So, everybody applies telling me that they want to do a research role in policy in international development. And actually, when they really get down to what that looks like, and when they realize what else is on offer in the charity sector, a lot of people realize that isn't what is for them. So part of it's about finding out what you want to do. So no, Samuel, it definitely will not. And actually, part of your answer might be around that, about you discovering that, but that's up to you. Natalie, yes, absolutely right. And how does one not sound trite or glib when talking about wanting to work for charities? That's probably the only question that's left me speechless. That doesn't happen that often. I think it comes out naturally in the way that you articulate an answer to a question. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, there may be a specific charity that you have in mind, something that you find that you're really interested in, but try not to limit yourself too much in terms of just mentioning one charity. I'm going to come back to stand out in a moment, Lauren, because somebody else asked that question. There'll be a bit of Q&A at the end as well. So general advice, write with confidence about your experience. Even if you think something might sound a bit less impressive, but it's infinitely more relevant to the question, it could demonstrate a competency that we're looking for. Use up all the word count. It's there for a reason. If you're selling yourself super short on word count, you probably missed something out. If you're going super over the word count, then you are probably writing more than we need to see. You can score maximum marks by fitting within the word count. It wouldn't be there if you couldn't. Don't try and cram your answers with lots of examples, or you risk never getting to the right level of depth. And also a really great point, ask your careers team to review your application. Most careers team at most universities will, if you show them the application, work with you on it and give you some examples about best practice. And actually, I suspect there may be one or two careers advisors within the webinar tonight who are watching this for that very reason. And that is perfectly great. We love to work with our careers partners to help people to do the best that they can. So yeah, please ask your career team to review the application as well. I want to speak very, very briefly about assessment centres. Now, I was going to run an activity with you guys that I normally run in person on campus. I think we have a really great group that could have done this activity, but we're just going to be short on time tonight, so we may try and factor that into our next webinar, and our next webinar is in January. But actually, you have everything you need to the end of this webinar to submit an application. But I do want to ask you about assessment centres. These will be a little bit further down the line, and we may look at running something for assessment centres after people have applied. But I just want to know what you think is the biggest challenge about being in an assessment centre. I knew you were a careers advisor, Claire, because we, of course, I'm actually referring to Claire because I saw I saw Claire sign in, and I've been working with Claire at the University of Dundee. But it's really great that you're here, and actually I totally invite or engage university partners to join us. So let's talk about what the biggest challenges look like at being in an assessment centre. Has anybody here been to an assessment centre before, or at the very least had a work-related interview? Just be great to get some feedback on that just for a minute, and what some of the challenges you found in terms of not necessarily being there, but necessarily preparing for it, perhaps. So let's see what some answers come out of that. Yeah, that's great. So Natalie has, Hannah has, Elizabeth has. Any challenges, any big challenges you faced when you were thinking about assessment centres? Lily, don't be terrified of assessment centres, particularly not Charityworks assessment centres, because actually people that all share the same value set as you do about wanting a career that makes a difference, and then meeting a bunch of professionals that do as well. It is one of the most friendliest environments. And also, I should point out that we assess Charityworks candidates across the whole process, and we don't make program offers until the end of that process. So you could be in an assessment centre, we could be having a great day, we could meet 30 standout candidates at one assessment centre, and you would all be made program offers. We're not taking a quota per day. You don't have to be looking around at other people and thinking, ooh, they're performing better than me. We look at everybody. So that's something that you should be aware of. So some people felt out of their depth with candidates who had a wide range of experiences. That touches on what I've just said there, actually, Taslim. So don't worry too much about that. More about potential for us than experience. An interesting experience at an assessment centre for a detective with the police, how to stand out in a group where without being seen dominant or too quiet. Yeah. Dominating other groups is a really common thing that people worry about, on being too quiet, balancing leadership and teamwork. Yes. Picking yourself back up after a part of an assessment may have gone badly. Yeah. Super important to point out that actually loads of trainees we have on the program this year, at some point in the assessment centre, they won't have performed very well at a particular task, but actually overall they've demonstrated the competencies and the skills. But we see it every year. Somebody will have a really poor interview because potentially they were just very nervous in one-to-one situations, but they were great in the group activities. So it's not over because of one bad exercise. Don't think that because the standard is so high that one activity will just see you not make it through as if you've done a major fault on your driving test. It really, really is important to realize that people make mistakes. And actually, we're looking at ways in which people are picking themselves up after a bad activity. And we talk about that as assessors, so that's really important. Let me talk make a couple of quick points then about assessment centres before I open up to questions. So this is jumping the gun a little bit. Obviously, you've got to get through the online tests and the application forms first. But this is useful information to know, I think, more generally. So I'm going to touch on this very briefly. During assessment centres, be authentic. I have spotted a couple of people at assessment centres, my colleagues definitely have, where people felt like they were maybe playing a bit of a role. So actually they weren't really being themselves. They were doing what they thought would stand out to assessors. And actually, I think that's really, really important to be able to do that. Be aware that the assessment is likely to go on all day. So while we may be assessing you on specific tasks, we are still listening to you. We are still talking to you. We are still talking about you at various parts of the day. That's not meant to scare you. Just maintain a level of professionalism throughout the day. Probably a good place to be. And this is a really important point, and this is what I want to pick up on very quickly, is make sure you stay relevant during assessment exercises. So somebody has mentioned here that actually they've been in an assessment activity where there's been somebody really dominating the group, and as a result they felt totally overpowered. Firstly, we spot that, and people that are dominating the group don't score well. People that are really over dominating the group, and what I mean by that is not letting other people contribute. So yeah, I think that's really important. Let's talk about that. And actually, I think one of the most important parts that I want to discuss here is what we'd call overdone strengths. And what I mean in this context of assessment centres is thinking about your kind of skills and abilities and what your strengths are, and making sure you don't go over the top with them. So be mindful of your overdone strengths. So if you are naturally confident, this is a good point, because people think of leadership development programs and they think leaders are the boisterous ones. They are the candidates on The Apprentice, running around Bruges, setting up, making sure that they're the ones that can be heard, and they're the ones that get ahead. And actually, leadership is not about making sure you stand head and shoulders above others. There are plenty of leadership styles. We talk very confidently about servant leadership, which is more about empowering those people that are working for you. Really, really important. So be mindful of your overdone strengths. So if you are naturally confident, and actually you do take a lead in a group, that's great. Use this confidence in activities. Take a leadership role. Make sure you're steering people. Make sure you're steering people in a good direction, though, and not just being over the top and boisterous and thinking you're being a strong leader, but actually you're leading people into a place where actually the team isn't performing well. But then be mindful to counter what we would consider as your overdone strength. So be mindful to counter the tendency to overpower others. And what I mean by that is what I was saying before. Don't, if you are a strong leader naturally, make sure you're filling in some time to listen to others in your group. Make sure that you're taking a step back when you need to. Be mindful of that overdone strength. Naturally, if you're less confident, we see plenty of great people come through the process where actually they are less confident in a group-based activity. But often they're really thoughtful, and when they do contribute, they contribute the points that are really, really important to the exercise, and you can be one of those people. So be mindful that you may have to counter the tendency to get lost in the exercise. So find a way to intervene, find a way to keep the team on task. What I mean as well by that is thinking about your exercise sort of more generally. Think about making sure that you are relevant. So whether that's you're keeping time in the exercise, or you're bringing the group back to the points within the exercise that are important, or if you're contributing ideas, you might be not talking a lot through the exercise, but you are making yourself known and you are trying to contribute as much as you can. Hannah says the problem with these dominant people is that they don't get through, but you don't either because you couldn't get the word in. That is an interesting point, but not always the case, because actually, like Andrew is saying, demonstrating competencies like being timekeeper, that is how you can demonstrate that you're a good fit for the program if you are relevant to an exercise. It's actually relatively straightforward to stay relevant in an exercise. You don't have to trample over others to do that. Be thoughtful about it. And those that dominate, we will notice if you're trying to contribute, or we will notice if you've taken on a task like timekeeper. That will be spotted. And even if you really struggle to get a word in edgeways, it does not necessarily mean that you won't make it through the next stage of the process. So I did have a little bit more to talk to you about in terms of activities, and I know online tests has come up a lot, but that is harder for me to discuss with you because of the nature of those tests. I do want to open this up now, actually, so I'm going to ignore the scenario that I had in mind, but I do want to open this up to you in terms of questions and answers. So you guys have been really, really engaged through this webinar. Great to see so many of you chatting and talking about the process and also about the kind of how to get through. I just want to see if we can pull some of these questions out to see if I can give some input on them. So if you've had a question you don't feel like it's been answered, please put it back in the text chat box, just copy and paste it back in there and I'll pick it up at the bottom. The provider of our online tests, I should know the name of, but don't off the top of my head. I can find that out for you and let you know. It is in my inbox somewhere because somebody has asked me a really similar question recently. So yes, let me do that when I've got a little bit more time, because I'm pretty certain they provide examples. And even if they don't, I highly recommend just using other online test examples as well, because actually, whilst all tests are slightly different, it will give you experience of what it's like to actually be part of these online is Criterion. And clearly my manager is listening to this because he's just texted me to remind me that it is Criterion. So Criterion are the people that offer online tests, so please check them out online. If we got through to the application stages and was offered a place on the program, do we need to have an interview with the charity we are assigned to? Tasneem, this is a really, really good point. So you've been through, at that point, a really rigorous and robust recruitment and selection process. So we would expect that you shouldn't be having a formal interview with any of our partner charities. However, it is the first time that a charity will have met you personally. And what we do is we put together a candidate recommendation for you. So we put together a recommendation that essentially has a statement of interest from you in that particular charity. We talk about how you performed during our process, and they know they're getting a great applicant because you've been through that process. However, because they haven't met you, they may ask to meet you face to face. And we would ask you to treat this, and we ask them to treat this as a more informal interview so that they're not going to ask you any competency-based questions, but they may want to discover whether or not you are the right fit for the role. And in terms of that role fit, it is important for them to meet you. So sometimes there is a stage for some of our partners where they will want to meet you at that stage. We've got loads of questions here, so I'm going to do my best to get through as many as possible. Claire asks about timeline for offers. You will normally be informed that you are have been made a program offer, or some people will end up on the wait list if they don't score quite as highly to make a program offer. You will normally be informed that around about July. And in July and August, we start placement matching. And that process is ongoing throughout July and August. So some people will be made an offer of employment as early as sort of middle of July. Some people it will be late August. And for others, it may roll into early September, although we try to make sure that's not the case. It just depends on the preferences, how high up on the program offer list you are, what you're looking for specifically. If you're quite open-minded, it's often very easy to match you very quickly. Are you partnered with any animal conservation, environmental, ocean conservation charities? Becky, in terms of ocean conservation, we are currently working with the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust. We are also trying to expand a number of environmental organisations that we're working with for next year. We're working with a number of wildlife trusts as well. So we do have roles in that area. We're also working with the PDSA. I can't guarantee which roles and which organisations will be available in September 2018 because that's always an ongoing process in terms of which charities are committed for next year. But I'd be surprised if we didn't have one within one of those areas. Let's have a look at some more of these questions coming through. I was wondering, what if I'm also thinking about doing my master's, but I'm really interested in applying to Charityworks. Are there any students who got in and did a master's part-time? Sarah, the commitment on Charityworks is very, very much full-time. You're undergoing a leadership development program that's incredibly robust on top of a full-time job. We highly recommend that you are not doing other study on top of that. the other option for you is, and some people do this, some people do the Charityworks program for 1 year as the experience, and then they go back and do a master's qualification. Some people do it the other way around, take a full-time master's and then apply for Charityworks. But I wouldn't recommend you doing a master's as well as the Charityworks program, unless you feel that part-time distance learning enables you to do something along those lines. But it is a pretty big commitment. You are probably looking at probably 40 hours a week, and sometimes during research periods or during conferences, there'll be some evenings where you may be in attendance at things too. So just be mindful of that. Let's have a look. So there's plenty of questions here. My dissertation is due in late September. That's okay, actually, Hannah, because the start dates will normally be in September. A few charities are, or a number of charities are flexible around those start dates. So it's typical to see most people start on or around the 1st of September or the first week of September, but we have had people start in late September, early October too. So actually, I would be saying that if you are somebody studying a master's qualification and your dissertation is due in September, I would still encourage you to apply to the program. Is the list of organizations on the website the official list that are all available for this year? No, Brody, that is not an official list for this year. The reason is that we work with a number of charities throughout the year, and many charities will hear about the program and want to join us, or they'll have vacancies that will come up that they want to fill. Some will be joining us and we will know who they are from as early as next month, and some charities will join us in the summer. So they'll all be joining us for placements starting in September, but we won't have a final list of what those placements look like. And actually, as a candidate, you're often not going to be in a position to see a final list, because actually we'll be working with your placement matching preferences. However, that said, there are a number of charities we've worked with every year, and that list is a pretty good indication of the kind of breadth of charitable organizations that we work with too. Is it possible that you may go through several partners before a charity decides you are a match? And are some people not going to match at all? Very good question, Hannah. Our placement matching process is really, really robust, and it has been honed over nearly a decade. What I would say is that the placement matching process is usually very good, but it isn't set in stone. If we put forward a placement match to you, you can tell us that if you feel like that match isn't suitable, and we can look to rematch you. If you're made a program offer, it's typically the case that you will be a priority in terms of matching. And occasionally we have put people forward where actually they just haven't been the right fit for that particular role. If that's the case and you're made a program offer, we do look to rematch you within a few weeks of doing that. So I have only seen a few instances where some people have struggled to get matched, but there were some particular reasons why that was the case, where actually there was some mitigating circumstances as to why that was the case. This year we have 120 trainees on board the program, and all our vacancies are filled. I'm not going to answer some specific questions I've got here, because I think some of them are just more generally about the program. If you do have any questions really specific to the program, you can email info@charity-works.co.uk, which I'm going to put there in the box. They will get picked up, and you will get an answer to those questions more specifically about the program. Also, I highly recommend, if you haven't watched it, that you check out the webinar that's titled Charityworks, Everything You Need to Know. You may even see it in your up next list, actually, on the bottom right of your screen now. It's important, I think, to view that, because actually it gives you a really fundamental understanding of the program if you haven't seen it before. This webinar has been specifically about how to perform in terms of a good application. I hope that the information that's been provided tonight has been useful for people that are thinking about applying. I am going to send you around a copy of the slides, including a copy of the exercise that we didn't have time to run, so that you feel like you've got everything at hand to make an application. If you've got any further questions about the program, or about indeed the application or recruitment and selection process, you can email info@charityworks.co.uk. You are more than welcome, Lily. I'm going to ask for any final questions, because I've still got another 5 minutes. So if you do have any other questions, we've seen some questions about languages. We take a lot of graduates, and this information comes up in the Everything You Need to Know webinar. We are open to people from any degree discipline, so any background, and we see a lot of language graduates. We haven't particularly in the past had many roles where actually they've been language specific roles. But what I would say is that a number of the charities we work with are working with very diverse communities. And actually language skills can often come in handy in many, many roles. Mary asked a really great question about disability disclosure. And I want to touch on that very briefly. So Charityworks is committed in terms of diversity to recruiting people from all backgrounds and to supporting people with physical or mental health problems through the process. I would say to you that under the Equality Act, Mary, you're not obliged to disclose a mental health condition at any point to an employer. However, I would encourage you to do so because we will implement reasonable adjustments to enable you to take part in the recruitment and selection process, and also will potentially use that information to work with you when coming to a placement matching process. So in terms of how you should disclose that, my thoughts are that, and I always give this advice to anybody thinking about disability disclosure, is the disclosure is for your benefit. You should disclose it at a time where you think that will benefit you. So if you feel like you are at a disadvantage during the application process, I would highly recommend you disclose it to us before you start your application. If you feel like it won't come into play really until the assessment centre, you can wait to disclose, but from our perspective, the sooner we know, the better, because we can get in place those reasonable adjustments. And we've implemented a number of reasonable adjustments over the years for people with mental health issues and with other issues. So if any of you have a disability or mental health condition, please do let us know. I would also let you know that if anybody here does have a mental health condition, a physical health condition, the organisation that I work for, Corio, which runs the Charityworks programme, we also work in partnership with Leonard Cheshire Disability to run an internship programme aimed at students and recent graduates who have a medical condition, and are ultimately concerned about disclosing disability or what that looks like in the workplace. We are open for applications now for paid summer internships, and actually it fits in very nicely with Charityworks. There is nothing stopping you applying from both. Some of the assessment processes are very, very similar. I'm just going to share the link to that. The program's called Change 100 and the link is in the box there. I highly recommend you check that program out. It has a track record of getting people with long-term health conditions, mental health conditions into work and feeling more confident about disclosure and about reasonable adjustments in the workplace. Let's pick up a couple more of these. Somebody's interested in research and has a background in research but not policy. Will that mean that a policy research position is out of my grasp? Absolutely not. In most instances, our charitable partners do like it when you have a level of experience in something. Of course, that always looks really great, but actually we're also looking at candidates thinking about their potential. So if you are interested in policy and in research in particular, and you have a research background, it may stand you in really good stead for a research and policy-based roles. But of course, I would encourage you to remain open-minded about what those roles look like. So you do not require a specific area of experience, but of course remember that you're in a candidate pool where some people may have some experience, and we take that into account when placement matching. Do you have students who study from a distance? Liv, do you mean that in terms of people who have applied to the programme and obtained their degree through distance learning? Because if you do, it doesn't matter where you've obtained your degree from, as long as you have a degree, which is currently set at 2-1 or above, unless you have mitigating circumstances. We actually purposefully remove where you studied and what you studied from your application when we mark it, and that is to mitigate against any conscious or unconscious bias from markers. So we will, as long as you have a qualification, that's absolutely fine. Lauren says, if I apply at a later date, are you at a disadvantage? As long as you don't apply after the 28th of February, Lauren, because that's when we close, no, you're not. We assess all applications evenly across, irrespective of whether you applied in October or February. What I would say is that application numbers are looking very strong this year, and whilst we're not formally talking about closing applications early, and I doubt that we would, given the fact that we've advertised the closing day as the 28th of February, I'd just be mindful that getting in an application as early as possible is best. I would certainly encourage you to apply before Christmas if you can, because you have everything you need now to do that. I think with this webinar and with the sharing of the slides and with the tools that you have, I think you should feel really confident about applying. You will find out, Hannah, whether you're successful in terms of the process as a whole once applications close on the 28th of